Supreme Court, big breaking news coming in. Supreme Court delivers verdict on electoral bonds. They have announced their verdict on a batch of petitions challenging the validity of electoral bond scheme. Now remember, viewers, this scheme allows for anonymous funding to political parties. The Supreme Court has said that the scheme impacts right to information. Right, big breaking news coming in. The Supreme Court has delivered its verdict on electoral bonds. The Supreme Court strikes down the EBS. They call it unconstitutional. According to the Supreme Court, anonymous electoral bond scheme is violative of the right to information. Now, remember, viewers, the scheme allows for anonymous funding to political parties. Right, we are joined in by Advocate Swapnil Kothari. A very good morning to you, Mr. Swapnil. Big breaking news: the Supreme Court has struck down the electoral bond scheme, calling it violative of the right to information.
Yes, absolutely. There was no doubt about that, and it's a unanimous decision. It violates Article 19(1)A because 19(1)A prescribes rights to information, which is a fundamental right. So if you test on the basis of fundamental rights, any particular scheme has to be tested on the anvil of fundamental rights, particularly 14, 19(1)A and 21. 14 is equality, 19 together as such is right to many, and 19(1)A is obviously right to information because that is right to free speech. And obviously, the concomitant of that is right to information, because you need to have information, you need to know as to who is funding, and if these kind of electoral bonds which can be misused and which are susceptible to a greatest amount of misuse, that means people of this country do not know as to who is doing what and who is favoring which political party. So as a republic that we are, we need to know, and we elect the government. So we need to know what we are in for. So if there are certain people who can misuse this sort of a scheme, then it obviously amounts to a violation of the fundamental rights, and that's the reason. Why we tend to fight shy of granting any legal sanction to that, and that is exactly what the Supreme Court has done. It has fought shy and has come out very, very strongly against the fact that these bonds, these electoral bonds, are completely violative because these are shrouded in anonymity. And when something of that sort is shrouded in anonymity, then 19(1)A comes into play, and that's exactly what has happened, and that's the reason why it has been struck down.
Right, sir. The people who are arguing against it, of course, they're saying that electoral bond scheme is not the only scheme to curb black money. There are other alternatives also.
Yes, absolutely. There's no doubt about it that there are other alternative options, and the least restrictive test is something which the court looks at. That, okay, let's look at the least restrictive means. And is this the least restrictive? The answer to that is no. This is somewhere restrictive in that sense that it restricts my mind into knowing as to what the hell is happening. So that is something which I as a citizen have a right to know. And if my right to know is in any way impinged upon without an alternative option which should have been proposed by the government, and which the Supreme Court finds that there is a possibility of the same, and that's the reason why the Supreme Court is saying that I'm sorry, rather we are sorry, we are not going to let this pass muster.
Right. Thank you, Advocate Swapnil Kothari, joining us there. The Supreme Court has, of course, struck down the electoral bonds. They have delivered their verdict on the electoral bonds, saying that the scheme impacts right to information, and they have gone on to call it unconstitutional, and they have struck down the scheme. Right. Breaking news there. The Supreme Court has pronounced its verdict on a batch of petitions challenging the validity of electoral bond scheme on today. Now, the scheme allows for anonymous funding to political parties. The Supreme Court, of course, has struck down the EBS, calling it unconstitutional, saying that the scheme is violative of the right to information. We are joining in by my colleague Abhishek is joining us. Abhishek, big verdict out there. The Supreme Court has struck down the EBS, calling it unconstitutional. They are saying that the scheme is violative of the right to information. Therefore, breaking news there, anonymous electoral bond scheme is violative of the right to information, the Supreme Court is saying. And of course, they have struck down the bill, the electoral bond scheme. Now, the electoral bond scheme, of course, is infringement to the right to information. And some of them who are arguing against it, they are saying it's not justified by the purpose of curbing black money. Not all political contributions are made with the intent to alter public policy. Students' daily wages also contribute. What about them? Those are some people questioning the validity of the argument. My colleague Abhishek is joining us to get us the latest on this. Abhishek, big breaking news. The electoral bond scheme, of course, has been struck down by the Supreme Court. They have called it unconstitutional, saying that the scheme impacts the right to information.
Well, you see, that's one of the legs on which the verdict stands, Guinea, and this is going to be an important landmark verdict in the political domain also, because remember, the electoral bonds scheme was introduced by the government through the Department of Economic Affairs about 5 years back, 6 years back in 2018. And the whole idea was to bring in an element of cleansing insofar as political funding in the country is concerned. And the electoral bonds were supposed to be bearer instruments in the denominations of 1,000 and its multiples. And the purchaser was allowed to buy electoral bonds only after filling in KYC norms or meeting the KYC norms of banks. But of course, there was this added advantage that the purchaser could remain anonymous. Now, that's something which got the hackles of the opposition. They said that this is a ploy because if you don't know who's funding, then it's clearly a case of the ruling party having an advantage. Sometimes that argument has been buttressed by the kind of numbers of funding that the BJP has received while in ruling dispensation and the opposition parties. I'm told Mr. Nalin Kohli of the BJP is joining us over the phone. Mr. Kohli, you think that this is sort of a setback for the government, given the fact the kind of investment that was made in backing this electoral bond scheme by the government? I think there is some tech issue with the phono patched with Mr. Nalin Kohli, but this is an important verdict. This is an important development. Electoral bonds scheme introduced by the BJP government at the center in 2018, now being scrapped by the Supreme Court, saying that, among other things, it hinders right to information, which is Article 19(1)(a), which is a fundamental right. Also, while articulating why there is concern about the nature of or the opacity of funding because of electoral bonds, the Apex Court has emphasized that electoral bonds is not the sole method available to combat black money. And there are concerns over financial contributions to political parties, given the fact that these transactions can lead to some kind of quid pro quo. And so people and the country needs to know, in the interest of democracy, in the interest of Article 19(1)(a), who's paying whom. So while the issue that the government wanted to tackle was the issue of black money in politics and the political funding through black money, the court has given perhaps primacy to the Article 19(1)(a) right to know, which is part of the larger framework of right to freedom of expression, and right to know what is happening in the country. And also, it has said that it leads to a certain element of opacity. So, sort of a fillip to the argument of the opposition that the ruling party had an advantage. It's likely that any ruling party would have had advantage, not just the BJP. But then, since the BJP has been in power for the last 10 years, and the ruling and the opposition party is desperate, not finding ways to electorally challenge the government, perhaps they thought that this is at least one way of making sure that the ruling party does not have the kind of advantage it has. So let's get some more voices on this. This is an important development. The government's decision of January 2018 was premised on clamping down on black money funding of the political activities in the country, cutting across political divide. But the Supreme Court giving preference to Article 19(1)(a) to right to information, and the fact that there was an element of opacity, and that's why the court has also said that this is about social, cultural, political, economic matters which constitute the foundational aspects of a functioning democracy. They need to be strengthened, not compromised, and that's why giving primacy to right to information, the court deciding to scrap electoral bonds. I think we are going to see a lot of politicking on this, and let's get some quick reactions also if we can get them. What is important is